I have a very simple cake recipe for you today, and I was determined to combine a couple of my favorite combinations of lemon, pine nuts, and rosemary in this cake. So it's quite a savory, sweet cake, but it is simple, very few ingredients. You can flavor it how you like. It is a gluten-free and grain-free, and actually this one is dairy-free if you leave out the optional ricotta at the end as well. If you like your desserts not too sweet, this one is for you. So we've got some almond meal straight into our bowl there. As you can see, no stand mixers, no fancy equipment required. This is quite simple. So half the amount of stevia. You can use stevia and monk fruit combination if you would prefer that. We have got 4 eggs. So I'll just crack them all into our bowl first, one at a time. Just good habit to be in to make sure we don't have any imperfections rather than ruining our whole batter. So it's actually the same amount of weight of eggs to almond meal to olive oil. So you could use butter, but in keeping this one dairy-free, we're using olive oil. So same amount of weight, eggs, almond meal, olive oil, half the amount of stevia. If you only had access to sugar, you would use the same amount as well. But because stevia is a little bit sweeter than sugar, we can use half the amount. So we're just gonna combine this. Oh, nearly forgot my only other flavoring, vanilla bean. So vanilla bean and olive oil somehow creates magic when heated together, and it turns the olive oil from savory to kind of sweet in flavor. So we're just gonna give this a thorough mix. So the eggs in this recipe are the only sort of lift or raising agent. So we do have 4 of them to do that job for us, but the end result is quite a dense and moist cake. So sort of maybe towards a Frion texture rather than a sponge, if you sort of want to have a bit of an indication of what the end product should feel and look like. So we can see that there's no traces of egg yolk or egg white. Everything is as one. That's like probably 30 seconds of mixing. Doesn't get much easier than that for this cake recipe. So we can pour that into our lined and greased cake tin. You don't have to line and grease your cake tin when it's non-stick and good quality, but it does make it all easier to come out, easier to clean. So a little bit of time spent now preparing it saves us a headache later. So all of that batter straight in there. And again, we're talking about making this cake a sweet, savory cake. So we're actually going to pop on top there some beautiful fresh rosemary and pine nuts. Just gonna tap that, make sure that it's nice and even and there's no air bubbles, or if there are, they rise to the top and burst. Pretty good there. So it's about 1 inch thick at the bottom of our cake tin there. If you wanted a taller cake, you can use a smaller tin, or you can double the ingredients if you've got a lot of people that you're entertaining. So we've got some pine nuts here and some rosemary. So we've sort of roughly chopped this. I'm gonna get about half of it and dice it even finer than that. So we'll put some on the bottom and then some on the top. Both of these ingredients, because they're on the surface of our cake, will get a nice toasty, roasty, crisp sort of texture. So you'll have the nice, fine, soft cake batter underneath, and then a contrast with a crunchy, herby, nutty topping. So it's almost like a crumble and cake in one. If you really love rosemary, you could put it all throughout the batter. I quite like the contrast between the vanilla olive oil and then moving towards the crunchy top, but do as you please. So we'll sprinkle all of our rosemary all over the top of our cake. So just like with any crumble, where the crunchy bit comes in contact with the sort of the doughy bit or the gooey bit underneath, there's a nice textural difference. So it's a bit of a transition. So I want to alternate the layers between the rosemary and the pine nuts, so that the ones that are sort of sitting towards the cake batter, they're a little softer, gooier, chewy, and pine nuts go quite soft and caramelly. And then we want to top it so that you've got those 2 textures. So pine nuts all over. Try to be as even as possible. You want to make sure that every mouthful has a bit of both. So we've got some of the rosemary poking through, but I've saved some, as I said, for the top of this, so that we get some nice and crunchy and toasty. So I'll pop that in now. So you just want to be able to see a bit of both of those, because they are going to toast in the oven. Last little bit. The woody herbs tend to behave quite well in terms of sweet dishes. So you could do this with sort of orange zest and thyme or something like that. It's much better than the soft herbs. So if rosemary is not your thing, you can certainly have a bit of a play with some of the woody herbs. So we've got all of our rosemary, all of our pine nuts in there. So we've got a nice crunchy topping. Because we've got quite a low sitting cake, I think the topping may even come up to about 1/3 of the width of the cake. So this is going to be all sorts of goodness once it comes out of the oven. We've given our rosemary and pine nut and olive oil cake ample cooling time. So you can see that we've got a nice even toastiness to those pine nuts, and we've got still some glimmers of green in the rosemary. Because we've given it lots of cooling time, it's going to be very easy to remove. And I always, where's our starting point? Just about to tell you how easy it was, but it's very satisfying to sort of remove the paper, revealing that edge there, and we'll just release the tin at the bottom. So we've got our cake ready to cut up in lieu of an icing, but keeping it still savory sweet. We've got some ricotta here, so I'm just going to sort of mash a little bit of that up, give myself a bit of a head start. Now we're going to use some lemon, some beautiful lemon that sort of brightens this cake up, awakens it, and it is a perfect pairing with both the pine nuts and the rosemary. So some of the zest, and we know that the pine nuts and the rosemary have also got sort of oils in them. So this sort of triple layering of all of those quite intense flavors really makes this quite a fragrant and very flavorful savory sweet dessert. This would be a great one for afternoon tea if you've got friends coming over with a cup of tea. Doesn't feel too naughty. Well, really, there's no refined sugar. And if you wanted to change this up for sort of a tofu or a coconut yogurt, it remains dairy-free as well. So you've got your sugar-free, dairy-free, gluten-free, grain-free friends sorted. Pop that aside. So I've got just a tiny bit of stevia here. This is optional, so if you really want to keep those savory notes in there, and we'll give this a good stir around. So you could just as easily serve it with whipped cream or something like that. But because we've already sort of got those savory notes, to add that cheese, that creamy, tangy, zesty cheese is quite a nice addition. Now some ricottas will sort of whip quite easily, others will remain a little bit textural. They both taste divine, so not to worry. So we'll cut a piece of our cake. So you could, if you wanted to, make this into little bars or little mini cakes or muffins or something like that. But there is our gorgeous layered with a crumbly top, layered cake. Put a nice big dollop of our ricotta on the side. So a savory sweet snack or dessert, here's our rosemary, pine nut and olive oil cake. I really hope it's one that you sort of give a go, be brave.